What a sad sight. The leaderboard used to be a convenient way to see what the best models were. But now it was flooded with countless Frankenstein merges, Mistral fine-tunes, and 7B models everywhere. It's now filled with countless contaminated models that are filled with questions from the leaderboard that are all shoved into the dataset. It seems like it's back to the, does anyone have a good model for blank? Such a convenience has been stripped away in the venture of getting a bigger number on a virtual leaderboard.
Bigger number, better person.
Truly a sad day. But how? What were the events that led up to this? Was there anything we could have done? Well, let's start where the local AI community really started.
Back in 1965 when they first made the first neural network, hell yeah, brother.
On February 24th, Meta, owner of Facebook and holder of all the alien lizards, released a new open-sourced LLM model. This model, in comparison to the models made by OpenAI, was comparatively much worse, but that's not what mattered. What mattered was the fact Meta, from this point onward, was the open-source AI model creator, not OpenAI.
Nice job, team.
Meta had a model anyone could use, locally on their computer for free. If you had the RAM and electricity, that is. However, this was just the beginning of what was to come for the open AI field. This new AI model, named Llama, was some of the best the AI community had free access to at the time. It had the ability to beat GPT-3 on most benchmarks, and its biggest variant, Llama 65B, was almost as good as the best models at the time. But unlike a model like Palm, they only used publicly available data. This, combined with its efficient size per performance, helped it become loved in the community at a time where the dislike for OpenAI was palpable. There's no need to go too far into it, but they call themselves OpenAI when their models are in fact not open sourced. It started with GPT-3 and continued at 4. It didn't take long for the local AI community to start playing around with this new toy gifted to them. Only 14 days after the model was released to the public, communities sprang up like Local Llama, a subreddit for sharing and talking about local models. Quick guides of how to download and run the models were made, and new fine-tunes just kept coming. Even fine-tunes of fine-tunes, like Uncensored Wizard and Stable Alpaca. But there was a small problem. Some of them tried to claim near GPT performance. But did they really? There needed to be a new way to evaluate how good or bad a model was, a way to get an understanding of what truly was the best model. In the first few weeks of the leaderboard being added, many models were uploaded, and after being processed, gave us this top 10 leaderboard. Personally, it's very difficult to understand how good a model is, especially if the models are only slightly better or worse than each other. The only real way to test the intelligence of a model is to test it in some academic way. The open leaderboard aimed to be a way to easily, at a glance, realize what the best and worst open-sourced models were. As you can see, the list is fully filled with models that use the Llama base model. The reason that they don't have the same name is that most of these models use the same base model and fine-tune it to make it a different large language model. Fine-tuning is much easier than making a base language model from scratch, and is way cheaper. Another month with more fine-tunes and a new base model. Also, if you're curious, fine-tuning is the act of retuning a model, using a different assortment of data. They aren't creating a brand new model, they're only changing one specific element of an existing model, that being the data. They can do this to overall improve the model, or try to specialize it to make it better at a certain task. Some of the first fine-tunes that came out were Alpaca in March, Vicuna and Koala in early April, and then Wizard Elm, just to break the animal trend we had going on. Even though these models all use the same base model, they all had their own feel to them, improving, in most cases, the base model. Another thing to note about the leaderboard is the different sizes of a model, represented as 13 or 65B. Nowadays, the most popular formats of an AI model are 7, 13, 30, and 70B for the parameters of a model. Falcon decided to be cool back then and used 40. These happened formats have so much usability that seeing how the entire idea of an open source local model is actually running them, these specific numbers really do help out. You see, the B after the number actually stands for billion, so this visual is slightly smaller than it should be. As it would turn out, a billion parameters almost equals up to 1 GB of RAM. This means the most popular versions of RAM equally matches up to the different parameter models. If you have 8 GB of RAM, use a 7B model. If you have 16 GB of RAM, you can use a 7 and 13B model. RAM can be talking about any type of RAM, by the way. even VRAM. Another technique people used to make a model better was merging. Merging was way easier than even fine-tuning. You see, why bother going out of your way to make a fine-tune when you gotta collect all the data, making sure that it's all quality, then you gotta get enough of it, and then you gotta make sure you got the hardware to even make the fine-tune. And after doing all that, you don't even know if it's going to be that good. Well, in that case, why not just merge two existing fine-tunes together and just hope it's better? If not, oh well. But then if you do, then you got a model people are praising you for. Technically, merging shouldn't really work. Nothing is lost or gained. It's just a combination of two fine-tuned data, but people realized it did work, so they just kept doing it. I mean, why not? In the beginning of the leaderboard, many different sizes reached the top of the leaderboard, but over time it would start filling out with only the biggest models. Seeing as the more parameters a model has, the smarter it is. A good model is one that's as smart as a 70B, but as big as a 7B. In most cases, there's probably a higher parameter model for the same base model. For example, if Falcon 40B is better than Llama 65B, if they ever made a Falcon 65B, it would be a really good model to use. After only a bit of time, Meta again released a new base model called Llama 2, a noticeable increase in quality over its predecessor, and it would only be a matter of time before new fine-tunes of this model filled the top of the leaderboard. Meta was really starting to get the hang of things of how to make a good base model. The same could be said for the community, which was getting really good at fine-tuning them. As you can see, a lot can happen in only a few weeks, and it makes sense. Way more models were added to the leaderboard. People were understanding fine-tunes, and would you look at that? Llama 2 was so good it was already filling the leaderboard. Who would have guessed? But what exactly were the things that made a model good? How can a model go from producing gibberish to become GPT-4-like quality? What made something like Falcon better than Llama, or Llama 2 better than Falcon? Why were fine-tunes even so successful in the first place? The parameters of an AI model are basically like the neural network. Ever seen one of these before? Basically, the more parameters you have, the smarter the AI model will be. Not every time, but generally, if you were to plot on a graph,
Bigger number, better person.
simple really. Trash in, trash out, as someone said sometime. You have to give the model a lot of high quality data for it to produce anything good.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
The data it gets can be from any available text that's out there on the internet, but the big problem is having the balance of having a lot of that data and making sure it's good. The overall architecture and inner workings of the base model. You know, the actual hard part. Training involves adjusting hyperparameters such as learning rate, batch size, and training duration. This is an important process as you want to avoid something like overfitting. Now if we were to rank it from most to least impactful, it would look like this. Another thing that you might have noticed at this point is a constant mention of GPT in the model name. Now, did this mean the model was as good as ChatGPT or even GPT-4? No. Did it mean that it was a fine-tune of GPT-4? No. No, you see, the naming was quite misleading, and people made their opinion about that clear. The reason GPT was in its name at all was because it was part of the fine-tuning process for the data. Why look up stories about dragons when you can make GPT-4 generate a story about dragons a few hundred times? This process did not make it nearly as good as GPT-4. In fact, if GPT-4 was here at all, it would never leave the first spot, even after a year later. Putting GPT in your model name was a trend that would slowly burn out over time, but never truly disappear. A character I would like to add at this point is someone called TheBloke. Bloke is a person known in the open LLM sphere as the guy that makes a GGUF of a model a few hours after the base model is posted on Hugging Face. He's not only the quantization guy, but also known for doing other activities in the LLM community. To date, his profile has over 3,000 models that he's quantized in his time. Just don't click on the bell, or else your inbox will be filled with over 1,000 notifications. Now, you won't see many quantized models in the leaderboard. Why? Well, the main purpose of quantizing a model was to get it small enough for people to use while staying usable. There are many different types of quantizing methods. Some use your RAM, and while it's easier to use a bigger model, it's much slower. And others are really fast, but you need to shell out $1,000 for a GPU to run anything above a 13B model. The main point is getting it small and fast. However, depending on your quantization, it could lobotomize your model. My recommendation? Stick to 4 to 5 km, and you should be fine using a GGUF. You see, the base model is always going to be better than a quantized version. So the real question is, why put a GGUF in the leaderboard in the first place? Well, you see, a quantized model really isn't that much worse than the base model, especially if you go for the highest quantized versions, like a 6km. So it doesn't really matter that much. It doesn't matter! Turl 2, 13B PL Instruct, Unload. The MMLU score is way too high for the 13B model. Can this be flagged? This was not the first, nor would it be the last time a flagged model was on the leaderboard. You see, whenever a model is flagged, it means that there's something wrong with it being on the leaderboard, and it needs to be taken off. It could be simple enough, like if there are two of the same model, but in this case, it was different. As the post suggested, the MMLU score was way too high for the model. The model wasn't just that good.
Back there is not real!
Instead, it had been contaminated. It had been contaminated with the testing dataset. The model was basically cheating to get a #1 spot on the 13B leaderboard. However, this model wasn't the true culprit, as it was a fine-tune of another model called Turl 2. Turl 2 was also a fine-tune of a Llama 2, but Llama hadn't had any contamination, so the blame was set on Turl. Turl's models might have been in fact the reason the flagging system was made for the leaderboard. Afterwards, his models was flagged soon after. The entire idea of the open LLM leaderboard was it being open. This means their tests are just out there on the internet. In that case, anyone using a model can just use the test dataset in their model to cheat on the leaderboard. There wasn't much people could do except find the models that looked out of place and flag them. They could also just not have the test publicly available anymore, though having it closed sourced was never the true purpose of the leaderboard. And if they did that, now the test wouldn't be reproducible, meaning if they just faked a score for a model, no one could prove it otherwise. Not only that, but anything closed source scared off many people in the open LLM community. The leaderboard would continue, and the new fine-tunes would start coming in. Most if not all the models in the top 10 were 70B Llama 2 models, the best of the best at the time. Some people might find the lack of variety boring and stagnant, and well, it is, but fine-tunes were really shining through. Even though a model might be using the same base model, it didn't make the model feel that similar. Some fine-tunes were just more smart and direct, while others were more creative and made for story making. Some even made them have personalities in mind, like Samantha. There's even a joke between the two different types of fine-tunes people like to use. All of this coming from the same base model, by the way. Another person quite important for making fine-tunes and the such was an interesting character named Undi95. You see, the models Undi made were, right. Well, let's just say he's on the more story/personality side of the fine-tuning business. His models weren't really top of the leaderboard worthy, seeing how most of them were around the 13B range, a range that in my opinion is the best for most people, seeing how most people have 16 gigabytes of RAM. His specific target audience that his models hit were very happy with his models. His fine-tunes were more made for a different leaderboard. Not something that would show itself in the leaderboard, but an interesting model would come out around this time. A new base model named Mistral that was only a 7B model, but in comparison to its size, it punched way above its weight. If this was a Llama model, it would have been flagged very quickly. You know, funny enough, people did try and flag the Mistral model, but it was found to have no contamination. It was simply that good. It was better than both a Llama 7 and 13B, yet no bigger forms of the model would come for quite a while. Two things I wanted to say around this time. One is a new fine-tune from Upstage, a person that has been here since the OG Llama model. They made a fine-tune named Solar that is just a really interesting model and there's no way it's going to do anything important in the future.
Foreshadowing as a narrative device.
Another thing was the things happening around the 7Bs. Mistral had completely taken over the 7B leaderboard with all the fine-tunes, and they were coming for the 13Bs. There's another thing Undi had done. He had combined two models together. Now you might say, haven't models been merging for a while now? No, I didn't say merge, I said combined. It was an 11B Mistral model. It was a combination of two 7B Mistral models. Yeah, I know the math doesn't work out, it doesn't matter. Now he wasn't the first to do this, but the technique and proof you can make a better model from doing this would spark some interesting ideas in the future. By now, on October 31st, newer fine-tunes would keep Llama's 2 dominance on top. Even with the new Mistral or Yai model, the fine-tunes of Llama 70B would continue onward until the up-and-coming Llama 3. The leaderboard would stay as the top way to see what the best models were. There was nothing wrong with the leaderboard. The flagging system was perfect. The tests the models had to take were perfect for testing how good it was in a practical sense. And there was no contamination in the leaderboard anymore. It was perfect. It was amazing. It was... You see, some cracks were starting to form within the leaderboard. The main source for keeping track of the leaderboard stopped around this time, due to the unrealistic scores the leaderboard was giving to models. The person keeping track of the data decided to stop due to that reason. It wasn't worth keeping track of data that didn't mean much of anything. And for you to really understand where they were coming from, a new Finetune came out called Tigerbot, took the first and second place spot on the leaderboard. And then, wait a minute, this can't be right, can it? That's actually impossible. This score was better than GPT 4.5.
I think it kinda sucks.
It was better than some of the smartest people on Earth. The V3 version had to be heavily contaminated. It was basically just a huge "I'm cheating" sign. The community thought so too, and it wasn't long before not only the V3, but all other versions of Tigerbot were removed from the leaderboard, letting a model named xaberius using a Yai-based model take the #1 spot. Yai was a new Chinese model around the 30B range that people started to use around this time. Thank goodness, finally, a top 1 model that we can say for certain isn't contaminated. But what if it was? I mean, it could, right? So why not at least check it?
Witch hunting spread virally through Europe.
Or at least ask the model creator for the source of his data, which he had not provided. Well, a quick post was made about it, suggesting the math score was way too high, and evidence for contamination. They also expressed their anger for the constant cheating happening on the leaderboard. The model's creator actually responded in the thread, saying that the flag is complete nonsense, and reminded people not to type under the influence. You see, they credit the success of the model to the use of UNA, a new, for the time, fine-tuning method. He insulted other users and said he's not sharing the source code for his model. The scuffle continues with even the model's creator's previous paper getting talked about, which was scrutinized for its lack of substance, and found to most probably be written by an AI. Not necessarily important, but does start to paint a picture. It's then finally, Clementine, person with a lot of responsibility around the leaderboard, came in and asked for the training set. The model's creator and Clementine came to an understanding, and the model was sent over for contamination testing. The creator of the model said with certainty nothing would come up. He was fully sure there was nothing wrong with the model. So, the testing began. For a bit of information, to be almost certain a model had cheated on the leaderboard, the test needed to come back with a score of 90% or higher. Anything lower, and it would be fine for it to stay up. Anything higher, and it was set to be flagged and removed. So the testing went underway. And came back with a score of a 99%, an impossibly high score. There was no reasoning your way out of that. It was certain this #1 model had also been cheated, though that didn't stop him from trying and arguing. Then again, with a score like that, it didn't matter what he said. The thread would continue on for a bit, with no changes happening to the decision, until the thread eventually got locked. It would not get better after this point. Even with the new release of Mistral, combinations of 7Bs were still beating it. Even trash Frankenstein merges of Solar Mistral were filling up the top spots. According to the community, these small models were not nearly as good as the leaderboard was trying to say that they were. I mean, you can see why people don't trust the leaderboard, don't you? A 7B model is much easier to fine-tune, and with an honest good base model to use, they just fill their test data with answers and cheat their way to the top. According to the leaderboard, parameters basically don't matter, and that's not really accurate. Oh, and that's also not including the Goliath model, which gets no love on the leaderboard. Now, on the bright side of this whole thing, I never even had the chance to talk about Mistral, a new model made by Mistral. A model that is an 8x7 model, a new way to make a model using experts. The model was one of the best, with a speed of a 13B and a size of a 40B. There weren't many situations where Mistral fine-tunes were found to be cheated. In fact, people are still having trouble making better fine-tunes than the base model. That didn't go for the experts part of Mistral though, as many people have been using that to their advantage to make better fine-tunes. New things are coming to the leaderboard as well, like an idea people have been throwing out for a while, which is a closed source test so no one could cheat anymore. Even if it did move away from the original idea of the leaderboard, and sounded wrong to many open source perfectionists, They knew it had to be done at this point. There's also talk about adding a contamination testing tool that anyone can use. There's even alternatives like Chatbot Arena, which uses an ELO system and people's own personal opinions to deem what they think is better. Maybe then people will actually study instead of cheating every goddamn time.